Okay, you are supposed to state whether the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. To do this, you must get y by itself first, and then compare the slopes. For number one, y is already by itself, so you can just look at the coefficient of x, which is the slope, and look at the numbers. You're comparing 6 to 1/6, which is negative. So if you have two slopes that is the opposite sign and the reciprocal, then those two are perpendicular. For number two, before we can compare these two, one of them has to be written in slope-intercept form because it is not. So I'm going to divide by 2 because that's what you do whenever you separate the 2 and the y. So I'm going to divide these two. 6 divided by 2 gives you 3x, and then negative 6 divided by 2. So then I would be comparing this equation with this equation. And you can tell that these two are parallel because they have the same slope. Okay, this is parallel because they have the same slope. So number three, before you can tell which types of lines these are, you have to take and put them as y equals. So we have to subtract the x from both sides. And then divide by negative 2. So we're dividing. So y equals negative 8 divided by negative 2. It's going to give you positive 4. Because a negative divided by a negative is positive. And then 3 divided by negative 2 is negative 3/2. So you are comparing this equation with the second equation. But before we can compare these two, we have to write this one x plus 4y equals negative 1 in slope-intercept form. So we're going to subtract the x and then divide by 4 on both sides. So y equals negative 1 x over 4, and then negative 1 divided by 4. So now you're going to compare these two orange equations. If you look at the slope, you got 4x and then you got negative 1/4 x. One is positive, one is negative, and they are reciprocals of each other. So these two equations would be perpendicular. All right, for number 4, we have to put this in y equals mx plus b form before we can tell if it's parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So we'll take the first equation and do 3x plus 2y equals 5. We are going to subtract the x and then divide by 2. So negative 3x divided by 2. And then you divide 5 divided by 2. Which you can either put as 2.5, or you can just leave as 5/2. We're not graphing them, we're just comparing them, so you can either leave it either way. Now we are going to put the second equation in slope-intercept form. So I'm going to subtract the x and then divide by y. Negative 2x divided by 3 is negative 2/3 x. And then negative 3 divided by 3 is just negative 1. And I'm going to look at these and compare them. So both of these, if you look at the equations, both of them are negative, so they're not going to be perpendicular. They're both negative. To be perpendicular, one has to be negative and one has to be positive. They are reciprocals of each other, but since one is negative and the other one's negative, then this is going to be neither. So your answer for number 4 is neither. To make more room, so I erased some of my answer for number 4 and 3. Number 5 is pretty easy to get the y by itself. All I'm going to do for number 5 is add 5. And then I get y equals 6x plus 5. And the second equation, all I'm going to do is add 6x. And my equation is going to be y equals 6x minus 1. And then I just compare these two slopes, and since they are the same, this one is going to be parallel. And then for number 6, they are both in slope-intercept form. So I'm just going to compare the two slopes. And since they're reciprocals of each other, but they're not, one's not negative and one's not positive, so they're going to be neither. They would be perpendicular if one was negative and one was positive, but since they're both positive, the answer is going to be neither. Okay, for number 7, to compare y equals negative x minus 5 and y equals x plus 3, you have to look at the coefficient or the slope in front of x, which the first equation, the slope is 1, or it would be 1 over 1. And the second, it's negative 1, which would be negative 1 over 1. And since these are opposite signs and they're reciprocals, then this is perpendicular. And you guys can look on this graph for number 7. When you graph y equals x plus 3, and you graph y equals negative x minus 5, you can see that these are perpendicular. They intersect at a 90-degree angle. Okay, on number 8, y equals 6 is going to give you a horizontal line. And x equals negative 2 is going to give you a vertical line. And these two are going to intersect at a 90-degree angle. So they are going to be perpendicular. And for number 9, in order to compare these two, you have to get y by itself. So all we would do for number 9 is to divide by 3 on both sides. So you would get y equals negative 1x over 3. And the second equation is already by itself. Y is already by itself. So you're going to compare the slopes for this. These are opposite signs, which means this is negative and this is positive, and they are reciprocals. So these would also be perpendicular. Number 10 says, decide if the lines are perpendicular. Y equals 1/3 x minus 10 and y equals 3x. So you're comparing 1/3 and 3x. They are reciprocals, meaning that they're flipped, because this is 1/3 and this is 3/1. But they're not opposite signs. So the answer for this one would be neither. Number 11 says, which of the following lines is parallel to y equals negative 5/7 x plus 2? Before I can do this, I have to make sure that each one of my answer choices has y by itself, which A and D do not have y by itself, so I would have to get y by itself before I could answer that. So for A, to get y by itself, I would just subtract 5/7 x. Should be negative 5/7 x minus 5. And for D, I would just add 5/7 x, because I'm doing the opposite of what's being done. And so now I'm looking at these answer choices to figure out which one is parallel. Something to be parallel to y equals negative 5/7 would have the same slope. So we're looking for the same slope of negative 5/7. So the only answer choice that gives me a slope of negative 5/7 is A. So the answer is A. Okay, look at number 12. For number 12, you're trying to find a line that's parallel to y equals 2/3 x minus 7. To find a line that's parallel, you have to look at the slope and find a slope that's exactly the same as 2/3. So it can't be A, because A says negative 2/3. B says 3/2. C says negative 3/2. And D says 2/3. So it's going to be D, because it's going to be 2/3 is parallel to 2/3. Number 13, it says a line parallel to y equals 1/2 x plus 3 and passing through 0, 0 has the equation. The only two equations that pass through 0, 0 are A and C, because the line that passes through 0, 0 has no y-intercept. Okay? It has no number that you're adding or subtracting. So it cannot be B and it cannot be D, because these both have y-intercepts. To find something that's parallel, you have to find the same exact slope. So the answer is going to be A, because they both have slopes of 1/2. Number 14 says, consider the two equations y equals 2x plus 3 and y equals 2x minus 1/3. The line represents The lines represented by these equations are parallel. Which statement explains why this is true? The coefficient of x in the two equations are the same because they have the same slope. So if you look at the coefficients of x in both of these, they are the same and they do have the same slope. So A is true. But just to make sure that we don't have any other true answer choices, it says B, the coefficient of y in the two equations are the same because they have the same slope. That doesn't make any sense, so that wouldn't be the answer. That would not be true. Both equations have two terms to the right of the equal sign. That doesn't matter. The constant in the two equations are reciprocals and have opposite signs. That doesn't matter. If the constants are opposites and have reciprocals and opposites of the same sign, that information doesn't matter. All that matters is whenever you're comparing the slopes. Number 15 says, which is the slope of a line perpendicular to the line 7x plus y equals 9? Before you could find a slope perpendicular, you have to get y by itself. So we have to take 7x plus y equals 9, and we have to subtract 7x from both sides, and we're left with y equals negative 7x plus 9. So this is the equation that we want to find something perpendicular to. That means we want to find something that is the opposite of negative 7, which would be 1/7 and positive. So the answer would be B. Number 16 says the line y equals negative 1/2 x plus 3 is perpendicular to which line? So we can only find out which one's perpendicular if y is by itself. So in each of our answer choices, we make sure that y is by itself, and then we want to look to find which one's perpendicular. So we want a line that is the opposite of negative 1/2. So we know it's not A, because that's the same exact slope. We know it's not C, because they are not reciprocals. So we want the opposite. You have negative 1/2. We want the opposite, which would be 2/1, positive. So the slope that's 2/1 and positive would be B. So your answer is B. And number 17 says a line perpendicular to y equals negative 4x plus 2 is, so we want to again find a line that's perpendicular. So our slope for y equals negative 4x is actually negative 4/1. So to find something perpendicular, it has to be flipped and positive. So we want to find a slope of 1/4 positive. So the answer is B. Good. Number 18 says, consider the two equations y equals 1/5 x minus 6 and y equals negative 5x minus 6. The lines represented by these equations are perpendicular. You know that they're perpendicular because the number in front of x, the slope for this is 1/5. The slope for this is negative 5/1. These are flipped, meaning that these are reciprocals, okay? And they're also opposite signs. So which tells that they are perpendicular? It would be D, that the coefficient of x in the two equations are reciprocals and they have opposite signs. The answer is not A because the constants in the two equations are the same. That doesn't tell me whether or not they're perpendicular. So the answer is not A. Both equations are written in slope-intercept form. Yes, they are, but that does not tell me that they're perpendicular. C C, the coefficient of y in the two equations are the same because they have the same slope. They do not have the same slope. It's not C, so the answer is D. Number 19 says, what best describes the relationship between the lines with equations y equals 2x plus 4 and y equals negative x plus 1/4? We are only comparing the slope. The slope for the first equation is 2 over 1, if we write it as a fraction, and the second equation is negative 2 over 1. Okay, these are not reciprocals. They have the opposite sign, but they're not reciprocals, so they cannot be perpendicular. So they're not perpendicular. They aren't the same. They have opposite signs, so they can't be parallel. They're not the same line because they don't have the same slope. So it's neither. It's D. Okay, so for number 20, what best describes the relationship between the lines with the equation y plus 6 equals negative x? So you are going to take y plus 6 equals negative x, and you're going to move the 6 to the opposite side. And you get y equals negative x minus 6. So y is by itself, so you can compare it now. And then you are going to rearrange this equation to get y by itself. So subtract x. Y equals negative x minus 6. So you are comparing these two equations. If you look at these two, they have the exact same slope and the exact same y-intercept. So they are going to be the exact same line. So the answer is going to be C.